The words that severed the evening sun cast long shadows across Julian Reed's penthouse office as he paced before the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered like the empire he'd built from nothing but ambition and relentless drive. At 35, Julian had transformed a small tech startup into Vertex Innovations, now valued at over $2 billion. The financial press called him brilliant. His competitors called him ruthless. Both were true. "Julian, you need to consider what I'm saying." Elise Winters stood her ground across the room, her voice soft but firm. "The acquisition isn't ethical. These families will lose everything." She had always been this way, steadfast, principled. For 3 years, Elise had been his rock, his conscience, his most trusted advisor, and the woman who warmed his bed. Her quiet wisdom had guided him through countless decisions, her emotional intelligence balancing his calculated pragmatism. But lately, her concerns had become inconvenient. "Ethics don't build empires, Elise." Julian's voice carried the sharp edge that made board members flinch. "Sentiment is a luxury I can't afford right now." "Is that what I am to you now? A luxury? A sentiment?" Her hazel eyes held his without wavering. The simple emerald pendant he'd given her on their second anniversary caught the light as she breathed. Julian turned away, focusing on the skyline, on the future. The Porter merger would double Vertex's market share. His investors were salivating. The board was unanimous. Only Elise stood in opposition, with her concerns about the small businesses. That would be crushed, the workers who would be displaced. "You've changed," she said finally, the hurt evident in her voice. "I've grown," he corrected. "I've evolved. The question is whether you can keep up." The silence between them stretched taut. Julian could feel her waiting for him to soften, to compromise as he once might have. Instead, he hardened his resolve. Success required sacrifice. Hadn't his own father taught him that by sacrificing a relationship with his only son in pursuit of wealth? "The Porter deal happens tomorrow," he said finally. "I need everyone aligned." "Then I can't stay." The words were barely above a whisper. Julian felt something crack inside him, but pride sealed the fissure instantly. "Perhaps that's best. You'll never be part of this world, Elise. You'll never understand what it takes to stand at this level." He turned, seeing her physically recoil as if struck. Something warned him to stop, but ambition pushed him forward. "You'll never be good enough to stand beside me where I'm going. You're holding me back." The moment the words left his mouth, Julian knew he'd crossed a line from which there could be no return. Elise's face drained of color, her composure finally breaking. A single tear traced down her cheek, but she brushed it away with dignity. "Thank you for making this easy," she said, voice steady despite everything. "I've been questioning whether the man I fell in love with still exists. Now I have my answer." She removed the emerald pendant, placing it delicately on his desk. The small click as it touched the mahogany seemed to echo through the room. "Goodbye, Julian." He didn't stop. Her pride kept him rooted, as she gathered her coat and purse, as she walked to the elevator, as the doors closed between them. He told himself it was inevitable, necessary collateral damage on his path to greatness. That night, Julian signed the Porter deal alone in his office, champagne untouched beside him. The next morning, he announced the acquisition to thunderous applause from his investors. The press hailed him as a visionary. His stock rose 12%. No one noticed that the light in his eyes had gone dim, or that he checked his phone, compulsively for a message that would never come. Within a week, Elise had cleared out of their shared apartment. Within a month, her name became unmentionable among his staff. Julian Reed had won everything he thought he wanted, never realizing what he had truly lost, until the emptiness began to echo around him, louder than any applause. blooming from ashes. The small bakery on the corner of Maple and Fifth had become Elise's sanctuary in the 8 months since she'd left Chicago. Portland's gentle rain pattered against the windows as she nursed a cup of chamomile tea. Architectural renderings spread across the table before her. At 33, Elise Winters was rebuilding her life one careful blueprint at a time. "More tea, honey?" Clara, the elderly owner, approached with a steaming pot. "Please," Elise smiled, moving her sketches aside. "And maybe one of those lemon scones? I'm eating for 2 these days." Clara's eyes widened, then crinkled with delight. "I knew it. That glow isn't just from the rain. How far along?" "Almost 5 months." Elise's hand instinctively rested on the gentle swell of her belly. The pregnancy had been as unexpected as it was transformative. A final parting gift from a relationship that had consumed 3 years of her life. She hadn't told Julian. Pride and self-preservation had kept her silent. His cruel dismissal had severed something essential between them, and the thought of being viewed as an inconvenience or, worse, a manipulation, was unbearable. Let him have his empire of glass and steel. She would build something warmer, something real. "Have you thought about names?" Clara placed the scone beside Elise's renderings of a sustainable community center. "Cassandra, I think. It means, she who entangles men, which seems fitting given her father." Elise laughed, but there was an edge to it. "But also, she who shines upon mankind. I prefer that meaning." The bell above the door jingled, and Elise glanced up to see Thomas Elliott, her new boss at Greenscape Architects, shaking raindrops from his umbrella. The silver-haired man spotted her and waved, making his way over. "Working through lunch again?" He gestured to her designs. "The Henderson project isn't due for another week." "Just some personal ideas," Elise admitted. "I've been thinking about affordable housing that doesn't sacrifice sustainability, creating communities that nurture rather than just shelter." Thomas studied her sketches with interest. "These are remarkable, Elise. The integration of communal gardens, the passive solar elements." He looked up, his expression thoughtful. "You know, the Westbrook Foundation is looking for innovative approaches to urban renewal. Their grant deadline is next month." "Thomas, I've only been with Greenscape for 6 months. I couldn't possibly—" "You absolutely could." He sat down across from her. "You were senior design lead at Vertex Innovations. Your portfolio is exceptional." Elise flinched at the mention of Julian's company. That was a different life. "Well, this life," Thomas gestured to her belly, with a grandfatherly smile, "might benefit from you taking some risks. On your own terms this time." That night, in her small rented cottage near Forest Park, Elise started the grant proposal. Working late into the night, she poured into it everything Julian had dismissed: sustainability, community, compassion, designing spaces that elevated rather than exploited. When exhaustion finally claimed her, she slept with one hand on her belly, whispering promises to her unborn daughter. 3 weeks later, she presented her proposal to the Westbrook Foundation. 4 months after that, as autumn painted Portland in amber and gold, Elise gave birth to Cassandra Rose Winters, a 7-pound miracle with Julian's striking blue eyes and Elise's determined chin. "Hello, little light," she whispered to her newborn daughter. "It's just you and me now, but we're going to be magnificent." The Westbrook grant arrived the same week as Cassandra, a cosmic alignment that Elise took as confirmation she was on the right path. By the time Cassandra took her first steps, Elise's design for Haven Commons was breaking ground. By Cassandra's 3rd birthday, Elise had been promoted to partner at Greenscape, specializing in sustainable community development. Life settled into a rhythm of purpose and joy. Cassandra grew into a precocious child with her mother's compassion and a fierce intelligence that sometimes made Elise's heart ache with recognition. On difficult days when the little girl asked about her father, Elise would simply say, "He's building his dreams, sweetheart, just like we're building ours." She never spoke Julian's name aloud, but sometimes, when Cassandra constructed elaborate towers from blocks, her face set in concentration, Elise would see echoes of him in the determined set of her daughter's jaw. On those days, she would allow herself one moment of wondering before letting it go. By Cassandra's 10th birthday, Elise had established her own firm, Winter Designs, focused exclusively on sustainable architecture and community planning. Her innovative approach had earned international recognition, though she carefully avoided the spotlight that might connect her to her past. "Mom, look!" 12-year-old Cassandra burst into Elise's home office one afternoon, tablet in hand. "My science project on renewable energy won first place. Ms. Bennett says I should consider entering the National Innovation Challenge." Elise embraced her daughter, heart swelling with pride. "That's incredible, Cass." "The finals are in Chicago," Cassandra continued excitedly. "We'd get to stay there for 3 days. Can we go? Please?" Chicago. The name alone still triggered a flutter of anxiety. Elise hadn't set foot in the city since she'd left 13 years ago, but looking into her daughter's hopeful eyes, Julian's eyes, she found she couldn't say no. Reflections across time. The announcement for finalists blared over the convention center speakers, but Elise barely heard it. The world had narrowed to the man standing before her, Julian Reed, older, distinguished by touches of silver at his temples, but unmistakably the same person who had shattered her heart 13 years ago. "Mom!" Cassandra's voice broke through her shock. "They're calling the finalists!" Elise forced herself to breathe. "Go ahead, sweetheart. I'll be right there." As Cassandra hurried toward the main stage, Elise and Julian remained locked in a silent tableau of recognition and disbelief. His gaze shifted momentarily to Cassandra's retreating form, then back to Elise, a question forming in his eyes. "She's yours," Elise confirmed quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Though I lost any obligation to tell you that when you decided I wasn't good enough to stand beside you." Julian flinched as his own words returned to him. "Elise, Not here," she interrupted, glancing toward the stage where the judges were preparing to announce winners. "This is Cassandra's moment, and I won't have it overshadowed." He nodded, a gesture of respect that surprised her. The Julian she remembered would have demanded answers immediately, on his terms. This man seemed different somehow, less certain of his entitlement. "Will you meet me later?" he asked. "Please." Elise hesitated, 13 years of carefully constructed independence warring with the undeniable reality that Julian deserved to know his daughter, and more importantly, Cassandra deserved to know her father, regardless of Elise's feelings. "The hotel restaurant tonight at 8, she said finally. "Just to talk." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you." They walked separately to the presentation area, where Cassandra stood with 4 other finalists. When her name was announced as the second-place winner, Elise cheered loudly, momentarily forgetting Julian's presence until she caught him watching their daughter with an expression of wonder and unmistakable pride. Hours later, after settling, Cassandra, with room service and strict instructions to finish her homework, Elise made her way to the hotel restaurant. Julian was already there, sitting at a corner table with a glass of water untouched before him. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed incongruous with the ruthless businessman she remembered. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I said I would." Elise sat across from him, declining the wine list with a shake of her head. "I don't break promises, Julian." The implied accusation hung between them. Julian accepted it with a slight nod, studying, her face as if memorizing its changes. "She's extraordinary," he said finally. "Brilliant, articulate, confident. She has your compassion and sense of purpose." "And your eyes," Elise said softly. "Your focus when she's working through a problem. Your determination." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "Why didn't you tell me?" Julian asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. Elise gave a small, bitter laugh. "You made it abundantly clear I wasn't part of your future. Should I have returned to beg for acknowledgement? To be dismissed again, but this time with my child's heart at stake too? I would never have. The Julian I knew then absolutely would have," she interrupted. "He would have seen a pregnancy as manipulation, an inconvenient entanglement threatening his precious freedom and ambition." She watched as her words landed, saw the flash of recognition in his eyes. He couldn't deny it because they both knew it was true. "You're right," he admitted, surprising her. "I was monstrous in my ambition then, blind to anything but my own goals." He looked down at his hands. "I've had 13 years to regret those words, Elise, to realize what I threw away." Something in his tone, a raw honesty she'd rarely heard from him even in their closest moments, made Elise study him more carefully. The hard edges of ambition had been softened by something that looked suspiciously like regret. The arrogance had been tempered, though not entirely eliminated. "Tell me about your life," she said, deflecting from the intensity of the moment. "You achieved everything you wanted. Reed Tower, global expansion. I read about the medical technology division. Quite impressive." Julian smiled without joy. The classic success story. All achievement, no meaning. He met her eyes directly. "And you? I saw your name on a conference agenda last year, Winter Designs. I almost attended just to see you." "Why didn't you?" "Cowardice," he admitted. "Fear that you'd look at me exactly as you're looking at me now." "And how is that?" "Like someone who once meant everything to you, but who you've learned to live perfectly well without." The accuracy of his assessment startled her. Elise had indeed built a life where Julian Reed was a closed chapter, a painful memory occasionally echoed in their daughter's expressions, but not a living absence. "Winter Designs focuses on sustainable community development," she said, returning to safer ground. "We've completed projects in 17 cities. The Portland Haven Commons was my first major success. Affordable housing with integrated renewable energy systems." "The very principles Cassandra's project was built on," Julian observed. "You've taught her well." "She taught herself, in many ways. She has an innate understanding of systems, how they work, how they can be improved." Elise hesitated, then added, "She's been asking about you more frequently, not you specifically, but her father. Who he is, what he's like." Julian leaned forward, eyes intent. "What have you told her?" "The truth as much as I could. That her father is brilliant and driven, that he's building important things in the world." Elise met his gaze steadily. "I never vilified you, Julian. Whatever passed between us, she deserves to form her own opinion of her father." Gratitude flickered across his face. "Thank you for that kindness. I don't deserve it." "It wasn't for you," Elise said simply. "It was for her." Their conversation paused as the waiter brought their entrees. As they ate, Julian asked thoughtful questions about Cassandra, her interests, her achievements, her personality, listening with an intensity that reminded Elise of the man she had once loved, the one who could focus so completely on something that mattered to him. "What happens now?" he asked finally, as they lingered over coffee. "Do you tell her who I am? Do I simply vanish back into your past?" Elise considered the question carefully. The easy path would be to return to Portland, to their established life, leaving this unexpected collision in Chicago behind. But looking at Julian, seeing the genuine longing in his eyes as he spoke of Cassandra, she knew she couldn't take the easy path. "She deserves to know you," Elise said finally, "if that's what you want." "More than anything," he replied without hesitation. "But I don't want to disrupt your lives." Elise gave him a measured look. "Our lives are quite solid, Julian. Cassandra has grown up loved and secure. She's strong enough to handle knowing her father, even if it's complicated." "And you?" he asked quietly. "Are you strong enough to have me peripherally in your life again?" The question caught her off guard with its insight. The Julian she remembered had rarely considered the emotional impact of his actions on others. "I stopped defining myself in relation to you a long time ago," she said. "You can't hurt me anymore." Something like sadness crossed his face. "I never meant to hurt you at all." The statement hung between them, a reminder of all the unintended consequences of thoughtless words. "Tomorrow morning," Elise said, gathering her purse. "Breakfast in the hotel restaurant at 8. If you're serious about knowing your daughter, that's where we'll start." Julian nodded, a mixture of hope and trepidation in his expression. "I'll be there." As Elise rode the elevator back to her floor, she found herself trembling slightly. Seeing Julian again had dredged up emotions she thought long buried. Not love, certainly, but something more complex. The memory of love, perhaps. The shadow of what might have been. In their room, she found Cassandra asleep with her tablet. Still clutched in her hands, her project notes displayed on the screen. Gently, Elise removed it and pulled the covers over her daughter's shoulders. "Mom?" Cassandra murmured sleepily. "Who was that man you were talking to? He looked at me so strangely." Elise smoothed her daughter's dark hair back from her forehead. "We'll talk about it in the morning, sweetheart. Get some sleep." As Cassandra drifted back to sleep, Elise stood by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, at the gleaming spire of Reed Tower in the distance. Tomorrow would change everything. Tonight, she allowed herself one moment of doubt, wondering if she was making the right choice. But when she thought of the look in Julian's eyes when he saw Cassandra, that mixture of awe and recognition and instant, irrevocable love, she knew there was really no choice at all. Some bridges, once revealed, had to be crossed. Foundations rebuilt. Morning light filtered through the hotel restaurant windows as Elise watched Cassandra fidget with her napkin. She had told her daughter only the essentials. The man they were, meeting was her father. He hadn't known about her until yesterday, and he wanted very much to know her now. "What if he doesn't like me?" Cassandra whispered, vulnerability replacing her usual confidence. "Impossible," Elise assured her, squeezing her hand. "But remember, you owe him nothing. Your feelings matter most here." His response came quickly. "Like mother, like daughter. Both changing the world while I just provide the resources." Elise paused, considering her reply carefully. Their professional relationship had developed into a comfortable collaboration, but she had maintained clear boundaries. Yet something had shifted in recent weeks. A growing recognition that the man Julian had become was someone she might actually like. "Speaking of Cassandra," she wrote, "she's presenting at the Portland Science Academy next month. You should come." His response was immediate. "Just tell me when and where." 4 weeks later, Julian arrived in Portland with none of his usual corporate entourage. He attended Cassandra's presentation, beaming with undisguised pride as she confidently explained her innovations to an auditorium of impressed educators and industry representatives. Afterward, the three of them celebrated at Elise's favorite local restaurant, a far cry from the upscale establishments Julian typically frequented, but he seemed genuinely content sharing Cassandra's favorite mac and cheese and listening to her excited chatter about the Academy's scholarship offer. "I should head back," Cassandra announced after dinner, with the transparent calculation of a teenager. "Rachel's mom is picking me up for the sleepover. You two should get coffee or something." After she departed, an amused silence fell between Elise and Julian. "Subtle, isn't she?" Elise laughed. "About as subtle as her father," Julian acknowledged with a self-deprecating smile. Though considerably more well-adjusted, they ended up walking through the neighborhood park near Elise's home, the early summer evening warm and fragrant with blooming jasmine. "The foundation work is going well," Julian said. "Your community housing model in Atlanta is being featured in Architectural Digest next month." "I saw the proofs," Elise nodded. "They're focusing on the integration of public space and private dwelling, exactly what makes the model work." Julian stopped beside a small pond where ducks were settling in for the evening. "I've been thinking about relocating to Portland," he said carefully. "Not to intrude on your lives, but to be more present for Cassandra, and to work more directly with the foundation." Elise studied him in the fading light. "What about Reed Tower and your empire?" "I've appointed a new CEO," Julian said simply. "Someone who balances innovation with humanity better than I ever did. I'm remaining as chairman, but stepping back from daily operations." "That doesn't sound like the Julian Reed I knew," Elise observed. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I hope not. I didn't particularly like that man either." In the quiet that followed, Elise found herself considering possibilities she had long since dismissed. Not a rekindling of old flames. They were different people now, shaped by 13 years of separate lives. But perhaps something new, built on stronger foundations. "There's a property available near Haven Commons," she said finally. "Walking distance to Cassandra's school. Good neighborhood." Hope flickered in Julian's eyes. "Would that be too close?" "I don't know," Elise admitted honestly. "We'd have to figure it out day by day." "Day by day sounds perfect," he said softly. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, the Reed Foundation hosted its inaugural gala in Portland's renovated historic theater. The foundation's first major initiative, funding 10 sustainable community developments based on Elise's models, had drawn international attention and partnership offers from government agencies across 3 continents. Cassandra, stunning in her first formal dress, moved confidently through the crowd of dignitaries and philanthropists, explaining the technical aspects of the projects with remarkable poise for a 14-year-old. Julian, watching from across the room, caught Elise's eye and smiled with shared pride. Later, as the evening wound down, the 3 of them slipped away from the remaining guests to the theater's rooftop garden. Portland's lights spread below them, a constellation of human connection and possibility. "First gala success?" Julian asked, loosening his tie with relief. "Unqualified," Elise confirmed, kicking off her heels. "The UN partnership alone will change thousands of lives." Cassandra leaned against the railing, looking thoughtfully at her parents. "You know what's weird? If you hadn't said those awful things to Mom, if you hadn't been such a jerk." She gave Julian a frank look that made him wince. "None of this would be happening." "Cass," Elise began, but Julian shook his head. "She's right," he said. "My cruelty forced your mother to build something beautiful without me. My loss became the world's gain." "And now," Cassandra pressed, with the directness that remained her hallmark. Julian looked at Elise, the question in his eyes seeking permission before he answered. In the 6 months since he'd moved to Portland, their relationship had evolved slowly. Coffee after foundation meetings becoming dinner, professional collaboration, gradually incorporating personal connection. Nothing was certain. Everything was deliberate. Elise nodded slightly, allowing him to speak for them both. "Now we're building something new," Julian said, reaching for Elise's hand. Not trying to recapture what was lost, but creating something better, something that honors the journey we each took to get here. Built on stronger foundations, Elise added softly. Cassandra rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her pleased smile. You guys are so cheesy sometimes. As they laughed together, a family formed through brokenness and redemption, the irony wasn't lost on any of them. Julian's cruelest words had indeed haunted him. But they had also transformed Elise into exactly the woman who could stand beside him now, not as the silent support he'd once dismissed, but as the visionary partner he finally deserved. In the end, his legacy wasn't the tower bearing his name or the billions in his accounts. It was the family he'd nearly lost forever, and the communities rising around the world, built on the foundation of Elise's resilience and Cassandra's brilliance. A legacy of connection rather than conquest, of renewal rather than regret. And as Julian stood with the two extraordinary women who had given him this unexpected second chance, he finally understood that true success had nothing to do with standing above others, and everything to do with standing beside them.